Hello, and welcome. I hope you guys have had a good week. Sometimes it's hard to see if this thing has started or to know if it's started or not, so I don't want to start talking prematurely. Today, we are going to be painting an animal, and we're actually going to be painting a giraffe. So you should have your canvas board. We are going to use it portrait style today, so it's going to be upright. With that, you should also have access to a template that looks like this, which is the outside shape of our lovely giraffe head that we are going to be painting today. So your canvas may already have this traced on, or maybe not, and maybe you get to be the one to trace it on. So if you, I guess we'll actually start by, if you haven't yet, go ahead and use your pencil to write your name along the back edge. Or if you've got the canvas board, just anywhere along that back side. I typically tend to write on them with Sharpie just because it's easier. The marker sometimes goes on the texture easier than the paper and stays on pretty well. So the first thing you're going to do is use your lovely template, lay it out on your canvas board. You do want to be sure to line up the bottom of the template with the bottom of your canvas and then just center it on there how you want. It does fill the space really well, which is great because it gives us more room to paint inside and to add some details. However, just be aware that if you're not paying attention, one ear may be closer to the edge of the canvas than the other. So center it how you would like. Kind of lay it out on there, and then you're going to go ahead and use your pencil to trace around that shape. So what this is going to do is just give us a little bit of a head start on our painting today. It's typically can get kind of tricky to do an entire painting in only an hour or an hour and 15 minutes. So sometimes when we do this initial template, it shaves off some time that would otherwise be spent doing almost an entire lesson on drawing out a giraffe. So this way we've got the overall shape of our giraffe, and then we'll still get to have some fun going in and drawing in some details. The great part about having the template and then adding in the details is everybody's painting still ends up having its own character and its own uniqueness based on your drawing on the inside. So when we get to the eyes and the nose and the mouth and some other parts, but it speeds up the process a little bit to have that outside shape already there. So the very first thing after you have your template traced is we are going to be painting the background. So in this case, we're just going to be painting the background a solid color, and then we'll be using a few different colors and mixing some colors inside the shape of the giraffe to add some details to them today. So for your background, you're just going to pick one solid color. In this case, you've got options on green, purple, blue, or orange. Or if your teacher had another color or two in mind. But these are just great bold colors that will contrast with the browns and tans and yellows of the giraffe itself. So today we're just going to pick one solid color to paint the background with. I've been debating on which one I want to paint, and I'm actually probably going to go, oh my goodness, such a toss-up, because they are such fun colors, and I should have already decided this by now. Kind of want to go with purple, but I'm really feeling green is going to be a good fit today for me. So I'm going to scoot this back just a little bit and add green to my palette. So at this point you do want to have your brush set handy, so you've got your variety of brushes. You do want to have your water bucket or your jar. I tend to prefer using a jar. It's kind of nice to use. It's upright, so it's got a little bit more water. It holds the brushes up so they don't flip out. And it allows me to see the color of the water really easily. So I'm going to go ahead and my lovely paper plate palette, squeeze out some green paint for my background. I'm going to start with my largest brush, and I am just going to go in and paint in that background. Yeah, that is a beautiful green. I think it's going to work out really well for me today. Whatever color you pick, have fun with it. Oops. A little bit there inside the shape of my giraffe. My brush, probably should have gone with a smaller brush for this top edge, but it doesn't really matter because the acrylic paint will be dry by the time I paint my giraffe, and so it will just be covered up with the other paints later on. So right now I'm just doing those larger spaces and leaving a little bit of space around my giraffe line that I'll go in later with a smaller brush to get that taken care of. So backgrounds can be pretty fun. They add a good amount of contrast pretty quickly and easily. And you can do some fun colors with it. Feel free to rotate your board as needed, whether you're doing it on easels or just on your table. It gives you a little easier access to different areas as you're painting around them. And I continue to rotate that. And I'm starting to see the overall, it's probably easier for you guys to see now since that line, that edge line is a little trickier to see initially. But it's coming together. I can see pretty well now, just that outside shape. I need a little bit more green paint on my palette to finish up. As you guys are working on that background, I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about background colors. So with each background being a little different color, colors side by side will bring out or sometimes either make it stand out or accentuate other colors. So for example, especially yellow, if yellow is next to a purple, if you've got a purple background and then you're painting something yellow, that yellow may look a little bit different than the yellow that's beside a green background. So each set of colors is going to pull out kind of undertones of different paints or different colors as they're painted side by side. So as you're painting, keep that in mind today. You may have a background of green, and as you paint some yellows and browns, you may really like it with the green, and it may pull out some of the undertones of yellows or browns in the green, or it could be the opposite where you've got purples and then you've got a stronger contrast with the yellows and browns. So those yellows and browns may look a little bit different from canvas to canvas based on the colors that they are paired with for the background. So just keep that in mind as you're going along. Sometimes we don't think about those things until we're experiencing them or until they're pointed out, but it's kind of a fun, interesting information that you can be aware of as you are painting and using a variety of colors. So I've got my background all painted on there. If there's areas I need to add a little bit more paint, I can. If not, that's okay too. Sometimes a little touch up is a good way to go. Okay, we are gonna go ahead and let that dry for a few minutes because our next steps are going to include drawing in some other parts on our giraffe, as well as using some colors to mix and paint. So let's give it a few minutes and we'll just let that dry. And I'm going to go ahead and pause this. So go ahead and take a few minutes to let that dry so that as we're working on the canvas, except that I never went in with my smaller brush and painted around those edges very well. Oops, I did that general shape, got kind of close, and then got distracted thinking about the next part. So if you are already caught up to that part, then now you're ahead of me, and I'm going to go in along that line and just get a really good edge line. So I forgot about that white space I had left outside of the shape of my giraffe with the green paint where I closely painted it, but I was excited to see the shape and forgot to get all the way up next to it. So here it goes. So those lines may move just a little bit as they get painted. We'll be painting them first with the outside shape color, and then as we paint along that line again with the inside of the giraffe colors, sometimes those lines move back and forth just a little bit. And there's nothing wrong with that. This green, I'm realizing as I'm painting this, matches almost perfectly the color of my jacket today. That's why I was drawn to it. It's a great color green. And I obviously already like it if I own a jacket in this color, right? So I switched to my smaller brush. Nice tight edges. I feel like with all this practice, I'm getting really good at dragging my brush to get some smooth edge lines. I bet you guys are getting so good at that. I know it can be tricky at first, and sometimes we want to push that brush, but just remember to always pull it. And that as you pull the brush, the buildup of the paint along those outside edge of the bristles will give you a nice, clean edge line. A little computer giving me some notifications. I tend to get those day in and day out sometimes. Okay. Around these little antennas? Is that what they're called? Is it accurate to say a giraffe has antennas? I'm not quite sure. It's not their ears. I guess I've never actually stopped to figure out what those are called. I do have a friend who loves giraffes though, and I'm sure she would know the answer to that. Yeah, it's making a difference as I'm getting right along these edge lines. Looking a lot more finished as far as that outside paint than how I just about left it last time and paused the video. So, good thing I caught myself on that one. So now that I've actually painted the entire background and right up around along that edge, I'm going to go ahead and let my giraffe dry for a couple minutes so I can rinse out my brushes in the meantime to make sure they are all clean. With this next set of colors, we are going to probably have several colors on our palette at one time that you can use from, that you can mix in a variety of forms. So I do recommend at this point, once you've got the entire background painted, and while that's drying, to go ahead and rinse out your brushes. Recommend also maybe getting a new thing of water. So I've got some nice green water here. I'm probably going to go dump that and get some fresh water. So go ahead and use the next little bit to get a little situated, and then we'll talk about paint colors in just a minute once we get cleaned brushes and let this dry for just a few minutes. Okay, so I hope that your background is pretty dry. Mine's looking pretty good. There might just be a couple little tiny wet spots, but for the most part, it's definitely ready that I could work with it and continue painting on it without disrupting the paint that's there. So the next part is, as we paint this giraffe, we're going to use a couple different groupings of color. So I'm going to show you kind of what we've got. So there's a yellow, a brown, and kind of a tan color. This is going to work for most of my giraffe as far as the undertones and the spots. This tan kind of gives me a little leeway to mix these other two colors as needed. So it just gives me a little bit more dynamic flexibility with the overall colors of the giraffe. However, I do have a couple more groupings of colors that we are going to use. So you are going to need to use some black and some white for the eyes, a little reflection on the eyes, and then the white also just gives us some flexibility to lighten and darken some colors as needed. So being able to work with maybe a yellow and being able to lighten it in some parts gives a little dynamic contrast to it. The last kind of set of colors that I have is a pinkish, so it's kind of a pale peachy pink and a gray. So this also kind of shifts some of the color just a little bit as we work on the nose portion of the giraffe. So a lot of times when we think of the giraffe, we immediately think of these colors right here. However, that nose portion is going to, we need it to be a little bit different than the colors we're already using, so it's a little bit more visible. It's just like when we paint our own nose. If we are doing a self-portrait and we paint skin tones and we use a flat skin tone for the whole thing, we've got to figure out a way to make our nose still stand out against the skin tone. So that's kind of what this peachy pink and gray is going to help us do, is as we paint in portions of the nose, it gives us a little bit of contrast against the other colors that we're already using. So that's kind of the color combinations that we're going to be using. So once again, we've got a goldenish yellow, a brown, kind of a darker brown, and then a kind of medium tan brown. We've then got a gray, peachy pink. I'm saying it's peachy pink because it's, this one is specifically called Calypso, Coral Calypso, but it's kind of a pale pink, which is just going to add a little versatile edge to our nose. And then we've got the white and the black for some contrast. So as we go in on our lovely giraffe, the first thing we're actually going to do is draw in some of those shapes. We want to be aware of which parts we're painting when. So we've got to create those parts and make them visible first thing. So if you don't have a pencil handy, go ahead and grab your pencil. I'm going to scoot this in a little bit closer so that we can draw in some lines. So the first set of lines we're going to draw in is actually going to be the top of the head. So on our giraffe, we have what I was calling the antennas, which I still don't know or not if that's correct or not. But there is this little bump in the middle of the forehead first. Then we've also got the overlapping shape of the ears. So we are going to define the shape of the head amongst our antennas and the ears. So from that bump, the first thing we're going to do is on either side of the bump, we're going to go down in front of that antenna. So we've got just a little bump shape for the top of the head. I'll try to scoot that in just a little bit closer. So it's these lines that come on either side. From there and in front of the ears, they're still going to come down and out, and then it's going to go almost at a curved angle where it comes straight down. So another way to draw that in would be even to draw from that outside edge coming up, and then about halfway across the ear, it curves and we reshape the overall shape of the head. So right now we've got these two lines coming from that initial first bump to add some details and reshape our head. With that, we are going to separate out this little top rounded portion of the antenna, which I really should look up the names of these things. So maybe one of you should Google it on your phone so you can be having a more educated conversation around them than I am right now. And then you could let the rest of them know. I guess that's if you're allowed to use phones. We actually have a technology policy where students aren't supposed to have their phones at school. It doesn't mean it doesn't happen, but it does mean it's not always accessible. So okay, so now we've separated out these little round portions just by rounding out that little lower portion. If we wanted to at this point, and it kind of depends on how you feel about it, you could start drawing in some zebra shapes. So keep in mind the little spots are going to wrap around that antenna. So you don't want to draw it where it doesn't touch the edge. You do actually want those shapes to go all the way to the edge, and an entire side of that shape can be on the edge as if it's wrapped around it. However, when you draw in the other shapes, you want to make sure that there is a space in between them. So it's almost as if you are drawing bricks or some sort of stonework where you've got this mortar in between. So you're leaving almost like a maze in between the different shapes. So you can go ahead and do that on both. You do not have to be the same, so you can figure out how you want to do your spots on each, if they're going to look similar or not. The fun thing about things like spots is they're going to morph and shape, and you're going to get more comfortable with them as you go. Okay, so currently we've got the antenna lines drawn out. Then on the tops of our ears, so kind of from those ears, we're going to leave a little space coming down from the top. And we're just going to draw a little line that kind of follows along, and towards the end it's going to curve under. So that's going to give us a little bit of depth for the top of the ear versus the inside of the ear. We're going to do the same on the opposite side. So you're going to go ahead and get those lines. If you want to draw that back, you can. Sometimes it just kind of fades out and depends. Once we have those lovely lines, we are going to add the eyes. So the eyes are actually going to be, they're set on either side, kind of like a horse. If you were to look at the front of the horse, you would draw the outside edge of that eye on the edge of the face if you've got a front view. So those eyes, we're going to draw inside, just along that edge. So you want to find a good spot. So in this case, it's going to be kind of inside where those ears are. You want to try to keep them about even. I'm kind of at a funny angle, so I'm trying to, kind of like you've got eyelids or eyelashes, I don't know, maybe an eyebrow. Think of an eyebrow as you're drawing in. However, instead of being the actual eyebrow itself, you're going to bring that shape in, and you're going to do it a second time. So it's going to be a little more rounded, and then it's going to curve to make kind of a point. So if you start from the point, it would curve to match it, but get wider as you go. And then it's going to kind of round out. So you've got some little eye shapes. But once we've got this, this is no longer going to be flat. So this is actually going to round out those outside edges. We're going to stick outside of the shape of our, just going to readjust my line a little bit. Stick outside the shape of the outside of the head because it's the rounded portion of the eyeball that we can now see. So above that, we are going to draw a second line, which is just going to be where more of that eyelid shape is. And from there, I'm actually going to pick up my canvas, look at it, which I'm kind of in a funny position because I'm not facing mine head on. Instead, the camera is, and I'm kind of off to the side in a funny spot. So I just want to make sure those are a little bit more even. Once I've got this lovely shape, I am going to draw some lines that come down from those eyelid lines. They're going to curve down straight. So I've got this separation between, or kind of the center of the nose going from my forehead down. So if you were to actually run your finger in between your eyes and your forehead coming down your nose, this is the part that we are currently drawing on a giraffe. Like my little nostril view there. From there, it's going to get a little bit wider as it separates out because we are going to be drawing the nose and mouth in this portion right here. So we're going to take a little bit of a break from that for just a moment. We'll come back to it, but we are going to draw the shape of the chin coming down. So we have this awesome jawline coming down on either side of our giraffe. So we're going to actually re-pick up where the jawline is and the neck begins and define that just a little bit more. So it's going to kind of flatten out along the bottom where the chin is, but otherwise on either end of that flat portion it's going to curve up and connect to this little outside bump that then goes straight down for your neck. Okay, so we've currently got our, I'm going to tip that down just a little bit so you can see it a little better. So we currently have our chin. We've drawn the chin shape on our giraffe. Now we get to do the fun part of the nose and the mouth, which is going to add a lot of fun character to our giraffe. So we're actually going to start that by drawing in the nostril shapes. So the nostrils, we are going to draw down below kind of these inside portions of the eyes. So I'm just going to move my pencil down. I'm going to draw it kind of like I don't know what you would describe that shape. Just a little curve that's kind of open towards the top. From there, I'm going to round out my top edge, and it's going to kind of connect like an upside down teardrop shape. So it's rounded towards the top, pointed towards the bottom, but those pointed parts are going to come down and in towards each other. So these are going to be the nostrils of our beautiful giraffe. And then we're going to add in, from there around the shape of those nostrils is going to be the nose. So we're going to get the shape of the nose coming around those nostrils, kind of like a human nose where you've got the nostril itself, the hole, and then you've got the rounded portion of the nose. However, this is also going to come down kind of like the shape of the chin before, where it's going to angle it down and come almost to a little bit of a rounded chin point. So it's kind of mimicking the shape that we did down below. Mine does not look centered, and I'm noticing that as I'm moving my body just a little bit. If it's not centered, that's also okay, because honestly, they're all going to be slightly different with slightly different shapes. But I'm realizing this side is a lot closer than that side. So I may make some adjustments, or I may just move it because he looks pretty happy actually. So once I've got that portion, I'm going to draw the portion for his mouth and chin, which is going to connect on that bottom portion. And it's just going to be a rounded shape for his everybody's is going to be slightly different on this. This is where it starts to get fun because it kind of gives the giraffe a little bit more of an expression. I'm actually going to move my chin down just a little bit so I've got more room for my mouth. And then I'm going to move my little chin piece down. So he's got his little giraffe face on there. With that, we are going to jump right back up to here. We've got these lovely eyes. With the eyes, I'm going to make it just a little more squinty, I think. I'm going to narrow out that portion just to make him look a little happier. And we're going to add some little eyelashes coming off just above at the top portion of the eyes. So where you've got that rounded portion of the eyeball coming out. With that, you can also just add in kind of more of the eyeball shape. And a little shape inside there that would be the white reflective portion off the eyeball. Okay, so we're getting our lovely giraffe drawn in there. We do need to go in and add the stripes along the neck. I mean the spots, not stripes. Getting my animals confused here. So similar to what we did up on the antennas, you're just going to, once again, those shapes can be right along that outer edge. And then from there, kind of figure out the space in between them as you draw in some spots. And once again, the spots on every giraffe are going to look different. So maybe your spots are going to be more angular and kind of sharp. Maybe they're going to be more rounded. You've just got to decide whatever is going to work best for you. Try to keep a pretty consistent thickness in between each of the spots. So it's kind of like creating that little puzzle or maze in drawing out your spots. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and back this up now so we can see our overall drawing of our giraffe, which is looking pretty awesome. And this gets to be the really fun part. So we've got our spaces drawn in there. One thing to keep in mind is as we're painting the colors of the giraffe, it's typically easier if we paint the lighter colors first, and then if we go in and add the spots last or afterwards, then if we've got any mistakes, the darker color can cover up the lighter a little bit easier. We are going to add, before we finish this up, just a few more spots on the face. So I'm going to, I was going to adjust my spot down here, but I may or may not do it. So we are actually going to add some zebra spots just along here on his cheeks as well. His or hers, I guess. So just from the outside edge, these spots may end up being a little bit smaller just because they aren't on the neck or a larger body portion. So they may be smaller. And they may even come down along that chin. If you want them to, you can. But it's entirely up to you. So we've got, our giraffe is looking pretty awesome there with his face spots, his neck spots, his antenna spots, and the other portions of his face. So here we go. Before we get too carried away, I know I had to talk about, especially on the neck, painting the lighter colors first. However, I believe the first thing we are going to paint is actually going to be the eyes. The black is kind of fun because it right away is going to add some contrast and start to bring our giraffe to life. So on my little palette plate, I just put on some black paint. I am going to use a smaller brush. So go ahead and start with black. Go ahead and just kind of paint in the eyes. We can always go back, and if part of the eyes gets painted over later, we can easily just do some little touch-up black paint because there isn't a lot of coverage with the black paint. But this is one thing that right away is going to bring our little giraffe to life. So where you've drawn in the shape for that little reflective light, try to leave that white and just paint around it. We're still going to touch it up with the white paint later, but this way we know exactly where that spot's going to be. So obviously if the black paint is completely dry, then the white paint you could get a pretty thick daub of it just to go over it. But if you leave that space already there, then you're going to know exactly where it is, and you're already going to see the look of having that on there. So you can already see it with that one eye, and then it starts to get me all excited because he starts to look like his own little happy personality giraffe. Okay, so we're starting to bring our giraffe to life. I'm going to rinse out my brush. And the next portion that we're going to paint, we're actually just going to go in with some of those undertones in the neck. So it would be the space in between the spots as well as on the cheeks and up here on the antennas. We will also be painting portions of it up here and in the ears, but in the ears and on the nose is where we're going to be mixing in some of those other colors. So I'm actually going to use my tan color. So I'm going to use the tan, and I am also going to be a little adventurous and mix in a little bit of this golden yellow right now. So we'll see how it goes. You may just want to stick with the tan for yours, or you may really like just some more golden yellow on its own. And maybe you just want to use that right now for those undertones. But I'm going to do a little bit of both. So I've got them kind of side by side on my palette. I'm going to mix them together in the center, and then if I feel like it needs to be more yellow, I can pull from the yellow, more tan, I can pull from the tan. So that's how I tend to kind of mix those colors on my plate. So we'll see how it's going. I actually really like the tan with the yellow undertones. I feel like it keeps the tan, but it's not as brown, so it's got a little bit more of a honey tan color to it. Okay, so from here, I am just going to go in. I can either paint, so it leaves me with a couple options. I can be really careful in painting the space in between my brown spots, or if I feel comfortable that I'm going to be able to see the lines pretty well, I can just kind of paint over where those are going to be. I don't have to stick with my lines. It may cover up some of the lines, or I may still be able to see some of the lines depending on how dark I used my pencil in those lines. I'm just going to start painting the spaces in between my spots, and I'm not sticking to it perfectly, so those spots can also reshape, or I can go back with the brown later and fill them in pretty well. So in having spots along my chin, it is going to give some darker contrast against the lighter colors in between for my chin. So I'm going to go ahead and add this color up on the forehead. And I do have that little section for the eyelid just above my eye, so I am going to leave that section. So we will add some paint underneath that line and along that line in a little bit, but we're just going to get the overall general shapes. So because we are going to be mixing this color for a little bit of contrast on the nose, it's okay for me to paint kind of along the tops of that, and then I'll just paint over portions and kind of overlap that paint later. But I also want to go in and get underneath my eye and around these spots on the cheek. You may need to use a couple different brushes with this color. And I'm painting around that portion that we drew in for the nose and the mouth. So I've got my nostril portion for the upper and the lower little part of his lip and chin there. I guess lip, but. If your paint goes outside your lines just a little bit, you can also try to just use your fingertip and wipe that up the best you can. Sometimes if you get it pretty quick while it's still wet, then it'll just come up on your finger. Okay, so far I've got kind of the space in between my spots on the neck. I've got the forehead and coming down part of the nose, got underneath my eyes, and I am going to go ahead and add in that same color underneath the circles at the top of the antennas and in between my other spots up here. So once again, don't get too concerned if you feel like you've messed up a spot. All you have to do is let it dry. You can repaint over it. And we are going to be adding and blending some colors together. So right now for my ears, I can go ahead and paint it in with this same color if I want, just right over along the top edge of that ears. I do actually want to lighten it just a little bit, so I'm going to use some of my white. I'm just going to do a little tiny dot off to the side on my paper plate so that I can, if I've got a color that kind of matches, just going to lighten that up a little bit with a little bit of white paint. And then as I paint the tops of the ears, it gives a slightly different color, which is kind of fun and adds to my giraffe. So I'm painting the top of my ears. And then I'm also going to go around this outer edge of the bottom of my ear as well. So I've got the outer edges of my ear painted, and then the center portion of the inside of my ear, I'm going to be adding some other colors too. So as I'm painting close to the eye, just that reminder, I can always go back in. If I cover up the black paint in a way that I don't want to, I can always go back in and just repaint that black. So I am gonna go around the eyelid on this top side just for myself. As I've got that painted in, if I wanted to add in any sort of darker brown to kind of mix it in, this is where it gets fun because you get to play with the paints. So they're all generally the same colors. So if I've got some of that goldenish color and now I'm mixing in a little bit of that brown, it's just going to darken it up. And then if I wanted to in there, I can use this darker brown mixed with the color I have been using to kind of create the inside portion of my ear. So if I've got a line to start with, that might be a little darker, and I may even want to go in and darken that up a little bit more. And then just kind of blend it out towards those outer edges where it may get a little bit lighter. So if I've got the same sort of undertone to start with, but then I've darkened it by mixing in that brown, I can pull that out towards that outer edge. And if I'm feeling nice and adventurous, I may go right back in, kind of mix them on there. It gets kind of fun and messy. And do a mix between the lighter and the darker. So it kind of blends the two together. So it goes from, I've got a light portion on the top, a strong edge with the darker beside it, and then I'm kind of blended the two together as I've come out on the ear. So I'm going to go ahead and do that on the other ear as well. So I've already got this light edge. I'm going to go in here, this strong edge along the top portion of the inside of my ear with that darker value. And then as that spreads throughout the shape of the inside of the ear and gets closer to that lower portion that we also painted lighter, I can mix in some of that lighter paint, kind of blend the two together as I work my way back towards that edge, the lighter edge. And some of you may feel more comfortable doing that than others. If you don't want to do that, you don't have to do that. You can just simply keep the darker edge lines. It just starts to create a little bit of a blend from the dark to the light if you want to try that. Because we are going to do something similar up here on that circle. So inside the circle shape, we're going to do kind of the same thing. We're going to start with that darker brown. Within that darker brown, we're going to paint kind of the outside edge of the circle. I've got a little bit of color variety already on my brush from the other colors. And then inside there, I'm going to grab some wet paint to the lighter value and kind of mix that on there. So I have got a little bit of color variety on that little antenna portion, and I will repeat that. You guys can see it. I may need to get a little bit more brown paint, that darker brown. Oh, it didn't want to come out very quickly. So if I start with some of that darker brown on my brush, the great thing about not always rinsing out your brush when you're doing stuff like this is that you pick up some of the paint colors that are already in the middle of all the bristles, which gives us a little bit more dynamic look or feel. I'm going to go ahead and get kind of the outside portion of that circle first. So right now my paint's pretty thick, and then I'm going to, on my palette, I've just kind of got this random collection of the different colors of browns. So I can kind of pick and choose as I go. If I twist my brush, it's going to pull some of the color from the inside. And then inside there, just going to add a slightly lighter brown. So I get a slightly different color and dynamic to it. If I don't like the transition very well, I can always go back in there with the dark, overlap some more, and tie it off. Okay, this is the fun part, right? At least for some of you it may be fun, for others of you it may be stressful. Okay, at this point you are welcome to go ahead and start painting in the spots. So you've got this darker brown, you can paint in the spots, you can mix the different values if you want to do similar to what we did up here where you've got the darker around the outside and then some lighter smudges of that tan inside of it. You're also welcome to use a little bit of the black if you want to darken it up. I don't recommend using black to darken most things because once again it kind of forms a little bit of a gray if there is any sort of white base to the paints that are already there. However, it may give you a look that you want for the spots. So go ahead and I recommend starting with your bigger spots first, just so you can get a little bit more comfortable with getting the colors that you like. And once again, if you've gone over your lines, you can kind of redefine those with your brush as you paint in your spots. Going to get some browns that you like, and it doesn't have to be the same flat brown the whole time. So this is where you don't always need to mix the entire shape or all of the spots in advance, because each one you can make a little bit different based on what colors you kind of add or paint inside of that spot. I guess I should have moved the camera a little bit. So we'll do that one more time there. I do like, it's my personal preference, but I do prefer to kind of paint the outside shape of that spot first. And then once I've got the outside shape of it, then I do feel a little bit more comfortable just mixing paints inside there. I typically don't want to try to color mix along the outer edge because it may not match the outside shape as well, or not go as well. You might lose some of the contrast. So once I've done that, then I can just add in maybe some lighter brown inside that shape. If my paint's still wet, it'll blend out. If it doesn't blend out, that's okay too. It just adds a little bit more dynamic to those spots. So you're going to go ahead and just keep painting in your spots. I'm going to back out a little bit so I've got a little bit more room to work in relation to my giraffe here. I do prefer to tend to have a darker edge around the inside edge of those spots, and then lighten it up or add lighter values inside there. I've got a little too much black. I'm going to add in a little bit brown back in there. Turn this so I can work a little bit easier without the easel being in the way. So I hope you're having fun with this part. I hope it's not stressing you out too much. I know for some, you might be thinking, oh, this is the moment I've been waiting for. I can just mix paints however I want. Well, to color match for the most part. And others of you, it may be completely stressing you out because you just want to have a flat color to paint it. And if that's you, just paint it with flat color. You don't have to mix. You don't have to mix the paints to create a different look or blending. You are welcome to just paint the flat shapes if that is what suits your fancy. Guess what? This is your painting. And we want it to be something that you are proud of and that you like. Okay, so currently I've just painted my neck spots. I've obviously still got more spots to go, and I'm probably going to switch to a smaller brush in order to get those smaller spots. I am still working with that same sort of random mixture of paints on my palette. So feel free to keep working with those as long as you feel comfortable with them. If you need to add more, add more. So we've got kind of a slew of colors that we can work with at one time. With the smaller brush, sometimes the tricky part with the mixed paints is that we get a lot of built up paint in the brush, and then it doesn't feel like a smaller brush because we've got so much paint and it's coming on kind of thick and chunky. So in that case, one thing I recommend doing is just pulling your brush on and twisting. You can also at this point get some water in your brush, rinse it out a little bit, dry it, and that also will pull out the paint so that it's easier to go back in and not have so much built up paint on your brush. Just mixing a little bit more browns. Oh, I just dropped my hand in there, so I want to rotate it a little bit so I can access the point I want without dipping my hand. Okay, coming right along. These spots do kind of are a little bit time consuming. I'm trying to watch the time to make sure we stay within the time frame. I know we still have the nose paint as well. So we just want to finish up these spots before we do it. So I'm hoping you are a little further along on your spots than me, which may or may not be the case, right? I guess part of it depends on how many spots you made and how big those spots are. The smaller the spot, the more time consuming to paint it sometimes if they're pretty detailed. Okay, I'm going to flip mine one more time so you can get up to these spots up top. So close. Down to my last 10. I recognize I do tend to use sometimes a lot of space on these paper plates, which means that occasionally I use more than one during a painting. So I hope that you have enough space on your plate, or if not, that you've got, I guess if you got a palette, you can wash it off to add more paints. Okay, woohoo! Got all the spots there on our giraffe, so we just have a few more little spaces that we need to finish up before he's all done today. So the first portion that we're going to work on is, we're actually just going to do this nose space. So that's where we're going to use our pinks and our grays. However, with that, we are still going to use our kind of previously used for the undertones, those golden yellows and browns. So off to this side, I'm going to be sure that I still have access to that color of my tan and yellow. It doesn't have to be the exact same, and I don't need a ton, but I do want some of it so that I can mix in my gray and my pink, and that my gray and my pink will match the other colors already on there because of that golden undertone that's already with it. So what I'm doing is I have on my palette the yellowish tan color. I've got my pink off to the side, I've got my gray off to the side, and that way I can pull in a little gray and mix it and then pull in some pink. So if I feel like it's too gray, then I just need to simply mix in more of that golden yellow. But already I can see the difference between my gray and that golden yellow color, which is what I want because I need some contrast for my nose so that it doesn't look just like the color that's already there. That pink as well seems kind of funny, but lots of times it will almost make like rosy cheeks, I guess, in a sense, but it makes it not so gray. It kind of makes it a little more fleshy. So I've got, liking the color that I've got there, got some gray in it, some pink in it, and that golden undertone. I've also got my black off to the side, which is going to play an important role because I've got to separate out the colors of the lips there. So I'm going to start just by painting in that bottom shape of the lip. So there is a slightly different shape and color, but it's still pretty close. So this is where my black is going to come into play. So I'm going to mix a little bit of black into the edge of that. And then what I want to do is kind of along that bottom edge, I do more of that grayish color. It creates the edge, right? And then I want to get most of that gray off my brush, pull from that lighter color again, and blend the two of them together as it goes into the shape of the chin. So that it goes from this darker gray to the lighter gray coming up. Because I'm going to want to do the same thing in the space up above where my nose and nostrils are. So I'm going to use that little darker color. And getting the overall shape. Oh, I guess I should have painted more of that golden yellow previously for my nose. Right now it's blending right in. I have just painted over top of my nostrils, and that's okay. If you paint around yours, even better, then you don't have to redraw them on there. But I'm just going to start with that initial color. Right now it's all blended in. In order to separate that out, I'm going to use the darker value, pull that in, and do kind of more of that gray edge on it. Oops, I didn't get enough of it for it to be noticeable. Oh yeah, still not quite enough. So I get that darker gray, which at this point I'm getting quite a bit of black in there to get that color. And then it's reshaping down. So I've got this sort of edge line in the darker gray. Now I want to make it so there's not as much of an edge there, so that's where I'm going to pull that lighter color in while the paint's still wet and try to blend the two of them out just a little bit. And I still want to blend out quite a bit more, working my way up into that golden color as well. This is where it gets a little trickier. I've added more gold, of that golden tan color to my brush, and just pulling that color up. Okay, it's not quite what I was hoping for in that specific spot. I do recognize, though, that I also have these golden colors that I did not paint previously. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back, use just that tan and gold color. So I do have some of that tan and gold color from before. If not, I can mix a little bit. I'm going to put that on the outside shape of the nose. And I'm also going to kind of reshape where I've got this gray for the top of the nose. So I don't want it coming up that high. So I'm simply going to move that line down with the yellow and tan. I'm calling it a golden tan, but I've just kind of moved that nose shape down. I am going to use that golden tan color above the eyes. I know we didn't paint this before, and you're probably asking, oh my gosh, why are we going back in and doing it now? It is because we want that paint color to be wet right now as we paint it, so that we can create that little eyelid edge line. And if the golden color's not wet, then it doesn't work as well, because we want to be able to blend it just like we did with the nose. So at this point, you can grab some of that grayish color that you used before and add in.
Teachers, it is 3 o'clock. You should be online for our training with Jamie. Thank you.
And add kind of that eyelid in there a little bit. So from here, we're going to go back in. I'm going to add in my nostril. I'm just going to use black. Recreating those same curves since I obviously covered them up. Make it rounded on the top, put it on the bottom. Do the same thing on this other side. Round it on the top. And point it on the bottom. And there you have your lovely giraffe painting. I recognize this one is a little bit trickier with the blending of the colors and the paints, but I really hope that you had fun with it, that it didn't stress you out too much. Once again, everybody's painting is going to look slightly different. If you've got a different colored background, that is going to change the look of the yellows and browns as well. This green does kind of have a brownish undertone, so it's already kind of coincides with those. So, okay, I hope you guys enjoyed that. I know we kind of rushed that end portion, and I apologize. I know the time is cutting short for you guys, so I did want to make sure that you have time to kind of work with that area. We did, even though it was the last portion, we did wait till last so that you could get comfortable with some of the other mixing colors prior to that. So I hope it wasn't too much for it to stress you out. If it did, let it dry, rework it. If you want to just have an edge line, keep it. Okay. Good luck. Thanks for all your hard work in painting and practicing and experimenting. And I hope you guys enjoyed this today. Okay. Thank you.